Right, you should see that Mr. Meenan is recording.
Yes, I do. I have the document in front of me. This is the only document I have in front of me, though, is this one that John shared just now.
You mean you don't have your copy of Electricity at Work Regulations and 7671 just sat on your lap?
Well, actually, hang on. Mate, you're talking to me. So, yeah, they're both on my desk. They're right here. But I've also got this one. I've got HSG85 here as well.
Wait. Are you telling me that we're going to do a podcast? You don't have your Irish regulations sat in front of you as well?
Fuck, no, that's on the shelf there.
Or your Schneider Guide to Electrical Installations book?
No, that's on the shelf. I do have, in case you really want to go clever, I have the NICIC Level 3 Award Periodic Inspection Testing Teach People How to Pass an Exam book. Yeah.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another E5 podcast. It's not the same day as the previous one we recorded. It's a new day. We're all wearing the same clothes and just chilling out in front of our computers. But welcome back to the E5 podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something very specific. So we have no idea if this is going to be 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, but we thought we'd try and exclusively talk about this. We were kind of just chewing the fat, and this came up. And so we thought we'd make it a podcast topic. Electrical installations in thatched houses. Now, there is no special occasions for this at all, which is a bit mind-blowing because in the last year on the E5 Instagram and you guys directly, we've been approached by people with photos. And if I can dig one out, I'll put it in the video of here somewhere on the screen if I can find it. But we've had pictures sent to us of electrical installations found on EICRs, rented houses with a thatch roof, and they've been lashed up with twin and earth and all sorts of the usual shenanigans. And it got us, people were asking us, what do we do? What's the correct thing to do? So we thought we'd use this to talk about it. John, would you like to introduce us to where we can get that essential guidance?
Okay, well, thatched properties are common in some areas, Dorset particularly, and not so common in others. The only actual guidance you can get is something called the Dorset model, which is basically a guide from building control about thatched buildings, specifically new ones and extending existing ones. And it's quite a short document. You can get it for free. It's actually only 3 pages long, which doesn't exactly cover a huge amount of it. And most of it is not actually about electrical stuff at all. It's mainly about fire and fire prevention and reducing the effects of fire if a fire should occur, because obviously a thatched roof, extremely flammable. If you get a fire there, it's going to set on fire, the whole lot's going to go up in flames, very difficult to put out, and so on. So the only bit it actually says in this is that advice should be sought from an approved electrical contractor regarding the most appropriate type of wiring system. So that doesn't help at all.
Does that suggest that approved electrical contractors will know the answer to this already?
Well, that's certainly what it implies, but unfortunately, as we know, that's not necessarily the case.
Oh, okay.
And then it goes on and says, effects from rodent damage and straw debris need to be considered. So the main deal here is the fact that all thatched properties are going to have mice and rats in them, in the roof. It's inevitable. And I don't care whether people say, oh, my house doesn't have rats in all that. Well, it does, because thatch attracts mice and vermin. It's just how it is. And
well, you're sure of yourself.
Yeah. And the main problem with this is that mice and rats like to chew plastic things, which means plastic pipes and plastic conduits and plastic wiring and twin and earth and all that stuff. And of course, if they chew through wiring and it creates a short circuit, you've got sparks and potentially things setting on fire and all of that. And the only other thing it suggests is that recessed lighting is not recommended to any ceilings below the thatch, because obviously you've got recessed light fittings. There's also the possibility of fire and things going through there. And of course, if they were like halogen ones, then overheating and potentially causing a fire. But it's the wiring system which is the main sort of focus in that particular part of it.
Interesting, because I'm reading a little document which we'll put a link in the description again if you remember, and maybe a screenshot on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube. A nice little document, Fire Safety for Thatch, from the Thatch Advice Centre. Understanding and reduce the risks, increase peace of mind. And then it starts with a really interesting bit on, well, I suppose it's one of those little A5 foldable booklets, but on a PDF you don't get that. And it effectively says, a regular electrical inspection will check your system integrity, but not your roof. But then the interesting advice is it says all wiring connections, including aerial leads and supply cables, must be spaced a minimum of 30 centimetres away from the thatch and any wire netting. Now, I've got photos, I'm sure, and if I can find them, God help, because so many messages is mind-blowing, of stuff literally clipped to wooden beams with thatch sitting on them. But according to this, 30 centimetres away, any cabling from the thatch and the netting. And then, as you said rightly, John, you know, mice and rats, they live in that wonderful duvet, that 5-star blanketing system known as a thatch roof. But it says electrical wiring in the roof space should be vermin-proof conduits and fitted by a qualified electrician. Vermin control is recommended. Now, that to me and you is well, the only electrical installation method will be steel conduit or mineral insulated, which we know if you go into like the old curry houses that are converted old pubs and stuff, you'll see tons and tons of old pyro clipped around buildings and stuff. But I've seen lots and lots of images in the last year of just twin and earth being thrown in everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, twin and earth in a thatched house is completely inappropriate. It will get chewed, it will get damaged, and there will be problems. So even if it doesn't set on fire, you've got chewed cables, they're damaged, they need to be replaced. So there's simply no way that can ever be an appropriate choice.
Is the risk of fire the arcing or the heating from the degraded insulation around the connection? Is that the risk? Yeah,
that will be the source, won't it? The fuel will be the
right. So I'm trying to marry that in my mind with how we have in chapter 42. If we have a wiring system in a location with risk of fire due to the nature of process of stored materials, we use 300 milliamp RCDs for the protection against fire. But if the cable is like a heating cable, like an underfloor or ceiling heating system, we reduce that down to 30 milliamp in those scenarios. Why is that different?
Say that again.
In chapter 42.
Yeah.
There's sections. There's obviously equipment, and then there's location risk of fire due to the nature of process of stored material, or if there's a nature due to combustible material of the structure, which this actually is. But in the section on stored materials, so you're storing combustible material, we can have risk of fire protection by having RCDs to 300 milliamp. But if there's resistant heating, which is like where you've got like cable that's already quite warm due to underfloor ceiling or heating or something, you can use 30 milliamp RCDs as a method of protection against risk of fire. So I'm wondering why
it's interesting actually you say that. It's interesting you say that, because I'm looking at chapter 42 now, 41, protection against fire caused by electrical equipment.
Yeah.
And it talks about being mounted on materials that allow safe dissipation of heat. Doesn't talk about distances.
No, there's only distances mentioned in 422.3.1, which is talking about wattage lamps that are non-existent these days.
It talks about enclosures of arc-resistant material, which would have to be metal. Again, it's the way this is worded is terribly. I mean, if we start at the top in the governor's book, as I like to call it, to me, Regulation 6 of Electricity at Work regs applies, adverse or hazardous environments, because it is one of those fibrous, high dust, high pollutant atmospheres.
Yeah.
It even talks about in this document about light fittings in the roof space should be enclosed in a bulkhead. Do not use downlighters. I have been in places.
So you shouldn't have any luminaires where things could eject from the luminaires if they fail. You know, that kind of scenario.
But even stuff like TV aerials should be fitted to a freestanding pole. Overhead supply feeds should have ceramic type insulators replaced. This is quite interesting, really. There's a lot more precautions on. We don't want lightning strikes. We don't want anything conductive on the outside of the building. We don't want anything that could thermally fail and eject into what is effectively fuel, because you've obviously got the oxygen. You've then obviously got the heat, and you need the fuel. Your electrical equipment is that source of heat. Even outside halogen lights create it. They need to be kept a distance. It's frightening, but yet Section 41 doesn't really. I mean, fixed equipment causing a concentration or focusing the heat should be at a significant distance from fixed object. It's generic. You need this document to give you that 30 centimetre rule.
I'll
to work from the intent of the regs.
I was thinking of cables, wiring systems. So if you look at 422.
Yeah.
.3.
Yeah.
.9. Now, bear in mind, this is about wiring systems in a location where you've got stored combustible materials, which is obviously not the same as 423, which is about the building being made of combustible materials. Yeah, 42239, wiring systems other than MI, busbar, trunking, or power track will protect against insulation faults, TNLT, RCDs to 300. And if there's resistive faults can occur from overhead heating, for example, we reduce it to 30. So I'm assuming that that regulation there is to take the potential heating effect of damaged insulation in wiring systems, because they're not MI, power track, or anything, and using an RCD as a way to remove the source of ignition.
I would definitely recommend AFDDs on a house with a thatched roof. I think that is perfect application of the right technology to remove the risk to as low as practical, because effectively, unlike my house where I've got concrete tiles or slate tiles, you've just got a massive, huge bit of kindling sat on your roof ready to go.
But the thing is, this is how I'm reading 7671, which is how many other electricians may interpret 7671. But what John's found here is something that pretty much doesn't even like thermoplastic wiring systems in thatch.
Yes, but this book, the trouble is, this book isn't written for thatch, and there's no special location because there's no European standard on it. So all we have.
So do we need a special location for thatch, or do we need to assume that electricians are going to look outside of 7671 because thatch isn't mentioned outside of scope?
I think there needs to be some. It's very difficult. There needs to be some sort of consideration. Because I'll be honest with you, 421 is very wishy-washy, and the regulation you just read out about wiring systems other than MI busbar, I used that on my 2400 design project for a warehouse that was manufacturing sheds and was very high dust and high wood content, etc., etc. And yeah, okay, RCBO, yes, fine, 30 milliamp, fine. AFDD would be a lot better here, even on the lighting circuit. Not that it might not do any good, but I'd still have it just as that additional assurance. But you're looking at a £2,500 fuse board for a thatched cottage before you get into trunking and pyro. So you then look at the hidden cost for homeowners. If you own a thatched roof, are you expected to be a seriously rich person? Because I don't know how much a thatched roof is. John might be able to tell us, but it's probably not short of 10 grand, and the electrics is probably going to cost you at least 10 grand as well.
Yeah, and if you have a thatched cottage, when you come to insure it, it's way more expensive than a normal house. And of course, they might specify in your insurance that you need to have certain things in place, like your wiring's been inspected and checked and it complies with whatever, and all of the other things. So,
but complies with what?
Yeah, because if it complies with BS 7671, as you said before, there's no actual mention of thatched cottages in there whatsoever.
No, and yet this Thatched Advice Centre gives plenty of examples of some beautiful homes that have been destroyed by electrical fires. In fact, there's even a Burgoyne's forensic investigation of 148 thatched fires.
Yeah, the only interpretation I can have on this is the regulations are written in a way that would protect thatch with the RCD, with resistant heating. It would work like normal fire protection. But I think because of the excessive likelihood of fauna in the roof space, as John has said, is a guarantee. They probably said that's not even a a possibility, because it's gonna get damaged. It's not will it get damaged, it's gonna get damaged. And that's probably why those other wiring systems have been pushed in this other document, the Dorset model.
Yeah,
but we need that to come into 7671 somewhere.
This identifies the majority of fires in thatched properties have been from ejected embers from fireplaces and chimneys. Henceforth, we line chimneys now, because if it ejects mid-chimney and it goes into loft space, boom, you've got an ember lighting your entire but it also says the other causes is electrical. So it's fairly evident there's a lot of fires on thatched properties. But I would argue that, I mean, the regulation on following original no, you can't really, can you? I was going to say manufacturer's equipment. But who makes it? It's a craftsman, isn't it? The people who thatch roofs are craftsmen. They've been handed down by generation to generation. It's just an old.
I won't specify the electrical.
Why have we gone from pyro and conduit then to twin and earth? Is it just because we don't know? Because according to the very first line on this document, a regular electrical inspection will check your system integrity. But if that person is a general domestic dwelling spark, and they literally go right, I'm just going to open up the board, do a few IR tests, it's all twin and earth, will they even know that this should be enclosed conduit system or mineral insulated.
Bearing in mind that this document is from the LABC, this should at least be added as an appendix to Part P. Because that's a document every domestic electrical installer is gonna have been told to read.
Very valid point. Yeah.
You know, we should at least put this information in their natural place. Because a lot of electricians will not necessarily look for these other documents.
Yeah.
They'll assume one domestic's the same as the next. They'll see one's got a thatched roof. They'll look in the regs and they'll go, right, let me fill it to its fullest in a location with risk of fire. And they'll identify, we can use RCDs for that. And then may go down that avenue. This document clearly doesn't like that.
I never thought I'd actually sit on this podcast and start, after all the work we did on AFDDs, but this is a perfect example of an AFDD installation, without a doubt, if you were doing a new one. My biggest challenge to this is, if we do, as I said before, if we go with an AFDD compliant installation and you're quoting for steel conduits, you're looking at least £10,000.
I would prefer, looking at this stuff, I would prefer steel conduit wiring system to an AFDD. Because an AFDD, as we know, won't work on low current.
Yep.
It's a lighting circuit in a thatched roof. I would again be in favour of wiring systems being a lot more robust for the life of the installation than AFDDs and devices.
And it gets worse than that, because there are some new British standards that are on their way, and it talks about the current energy efficiency profile of white goods and fixed equipment being even more efficient. So whereas we had a 100-watt bulb, which is now a 10-watt LED bulb, in 20 years' time it will be 1 watt with the same lumen output. So we're gonna be running. This is the dumb thing. At some point, and I'm just going to throw it under this particular podcast bus. At some point, we really need to think in our selection direction about how we size our breakers, because on my board I've got like 40 amp, 32, 20s, and I'm thinking, do I actually need a 20? Really? Because all my equipment in my living room is probably pulling 1.5 amps. So why do I need 20 amp radials?
I've looked at the on-site guides, demand, the diversity templates and stuff.
Yeah.
And as much as you can play with them and make the assumptions to put some maximum demands as up to the 60s or so, when you look at the utilization of electrical installations, you're going to be nowhere near them with the majority. You know, because they're pushing them a lot now, because they're looking at whether or not you do or do not need to contact the DNO for electric vehicles. Because if you get over that 60 amp sweet spot, and with the general typical small installation, you're about to hover over it if you follow that guidance in the on-site guide to the letter. But if you're realistic in the utilization and looking at the lighting levels, you know, you say 6 amp when the lighting, because it still uses the 100 watt lamps, you know, per lamp for utilization, doesn't it? It's out of date.
Yeah, it is out of date. That's what's in that on-site guide. The thing about the 100 watts per lamp holder, that first came in the 15th edition in 1981. So, and it's not been revised since. And then even worse, all the rest of it, you know, about the 66% utilization of the circuit and all the rest of it, that first came out in the 10th edition in 1934, and it's almost unchanged since then.
Wow.
So grossly out of date, really. I mean, it couldn't be absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, I'm call me a farmer of common sense.
You're digging for something, but what are you looking at, me?
Well, I'm looking at my favourite chapter of all, chapter 13, fundamental principles.
Yeah.
The requirements is to provide safety of persons and property against dangers and damage arising reasonable use of the installation.
131,
shock current, excessive temperatures, power supply interruptions, arcing or burning likely to cause, you know, gases, etc. We then fast forward to 13131. Electrical installations shall be arranged so the risk of ignition of flammable materials due to high temperature or electric arc is minimised. In addition, during normal operation of the electrical equipment, there should be minimal risks of burns to persons or livestock, not property, interestingly.
No.
Then it says in 13132, persons, livestock, fixed equipment and fixed materials adjacent to electrical equipment, which could be a thatched roof, shall be protected against harmful effects of heat or thermal radiation emitted by electrical equipment, which then leads obviously into 42. And in particular following: combustion, ignition, degradation of materials, risk of burns, impairment of the safe function of installed equipment. Electrical equipment shall not provide a fire hazard to adjacent materials. That's really clear. 42 is not. but that one is really clear. So again, as I've always said, you don't need to go past chapter 13. It's like a choose your own adventure. If you're arguing over the bits in chapter 4 and 5, you're not understanding chapter 13, which is your fundamental principles. If we then carry on, because you know me, I do like to read through these. Environmental conditions. The design of the installation shall take into account the environmental conditions to which it will be subjected. It's a roof. It's really, really hot.
Yes.
Equipment in surrounding areas susceptible to fire or risk of fire shall be constructed or protected. So such other special precautions shall be taken to prevent danger. That's 1325. 1327. Type of wiring and method. The choice in type of wiring system shall include consideration for the following, and it gives a list: nature, structure, accessibility to persons and livestock, rats, other external influences, mechanical, electrical, thermal. What else have we got here? The electrical 13211. The electrical installation should be arranged in a way that no mutual detrimental influence will occur between electrical installations and non-electrical installations. That's at least 6 regs in chapter 13 straight away that give us more clarity than 42 and all the rest, 41 and 42 does. Combined with that document from the Thatched Centre, I would put that in place. I don't know what the industry bodies are because are telling their contractors, because it says a regular electrical inspection will check your system integrity. Do we know of anything that the industry bodies for commercial profit enterprises have actually put out, John?
No, I've not seen anything, or certainly not recently anyway. It's just, it basically all comes back to this Dorset model thing, as if it's some kind of wonder document that tells you everything you need to know. But so unfortunately, it only has literally a couple of lines in, and then it's just guidance from various places like this Thatch document we've got here.
So I'll give you then a few more regs just that I've been looking at. So 13312, where there are no applicable standards, the item of equipment concerned shall be selected by special agreement between the person specifying and the installer. Now this is a really interesting debate, because if the person specifying says I ain't having conduit, stick it in twin and earth, then what's the installer going to do? Walk away or take the work? This is the inherent danger. Now I actually think that regulation 30 of the electricity at work regs applies here, which is exemption certificates. This is where, as a contractor, I'd probably go and speak to the HSE, and the HSE would probably get involved. And I think the HSE probably need to do more work on this. So I'm actually going to take an action away from this, because in my electrical safety roundtable, I'm going to ask a question about providing some guidance via them to electrical installers for Thatch installations. I may get shot down, but you've got to ask the question. And then if we carry on through chapter 13, new materials and inventions. The use of a new material leads to a departure from the regulations. The resulting degree of safety shall not be less than that obtained with compliance. Twin and earth, that's not a new material or innovation, but it is in a thatched house because they're not used to it. They're used to enclosed metal and pyro. Good workmanship, proper materials should be used. Well, that would be breached if you're chucking twin and earth in. And also one of the more pertinent, again, environmental based, 13415. Electrical equipment shall be installed in a manner where the design temperatures are not exceeded. Put stuff in a loft, it's going to get bloody hot.
Yeah, that's a regulation a lot of inspectors need to review periodically.
Well, we're going to do a webinar on this
Mm-hmm.
against the electricity at work reg, so we've kind of given you a sneaky preview at some point this year. So
yeah, I've just done a quick Googling. I've not seen anything that directly attaches guidance from any of the bodies from the perspective of thatch roofs.
okay,
Yeah,
so
I don't think there is any, as I've not seen any.
No.
It just comes back to this thing, which
okay, well,
Yeah.
I will throw myself under the bus and ask NAPIT at some point this working week to try and do something. I'll try and do so myself, but dear NIC and NAPIT, could you please maybe provide some more concise guidance rather than allowing contractors to throw twin and earth in everywhere?
Well, yeah, something needs to join the dots to take BS 7671 and either make 7671 fuller to include the thatch roof for those extra engineering considerations.
I don't think 7671 will.
Or it needs to exclude it then, so they know they need to look elsewhere at that point.
Dave, it doesn't have to, because it's clear enough. The trouble is it's our understanding and interpretation of the document. The way that the reason I think the wiring regs is not fit for purpose anymore is because the way we consider and analyze is different from when the wiring regs was initially written. many years ago. The skills and competency of the selectors and erectors is not the same as what it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. Hence the interpretation of more and more and more regs and more technology is being lost in these very poorly worded descriptors that we call regulations. Now, we've just gone through 20 regulations from chapter 13 through to 41 and 42. There's enough in there for us to take an engineering view that we should segregate the fixed electrical installation, anything that produces heat, away from a combustible material. Yeah. Simple, but no one's document really tells you that, other than the good guidance produced by the this Thatched Advice Centre and the Dorset model, as Mr. Ward says. Yeah,
and I think in terms of what you're going to install, I mean, AFDDs may have a good use case in a thatched cottage.
Yeah,
but that is not. You can't just say, "Oh, we're going to bung AFDDs in all as well," because this is the same as what happened with RCDs when they were first introduced. There's some kind of sticking plaster solution. The problem with AFDDs is that they're a reactive solution. They're only going to work if some problem has already occurred, as in something's arcing and there's a problem there. If you put steel conduit in, that's sort of more of a proactive thing. You're putting stuff in place to prevent those things happening in the first place. So put the steel conduit in, put the pyro in if you want to. If you want to put AFDDs in as well, why not? But don't go down the route thinking, oh, it's an AFDD, we'll bung that in, all is fine, just sling the old twin and earth in as well, because it's sort of, you're only putting part of a solution in place there. And that's probably why this says to put in steel conduit as the standard choice for a thatched cottage.
Yep. Well, I've learned a little bit more today. I've understood a very specific topic a little bit more today. So hopefully anybody watching or listening, hopefully this has provided you a reasonable interpretation. And in summary, pyro, steel conduit with singles, RCBOs or AFDDs, do a proper job. And any more advice, go to the Thatched Advice Centre or look up the Dorset model. We'll try and put links in the video down below. Obviously, if you're listening to this, just check it out on the YouTube channel. And yeah, any other thoughts on this, chaps? It's been a short one today.
No, I still think 7671 needs to say something to tell electricians not to, because otherwise they're on autopilot. They'll just look at they may just look at a thatched property as either special or residential, and they won't see it in special. They'll just go to residential and they'll say, oh, it's all inclusive.
That's a good point. Is it exempt from 7671? That list of exemptions?
Yeah, that's not in there.
It's not in there, no?
No, it's within the scope. And I think I'll just put the other final point here is that don't assume that thatched cottages are old and they've been there 300 years, because new buildings with thatch on are still being constructed in 2021. And there's a development down the road from where I live. It's made by Bovis Homes. It's one of these sort of fill-in developments. It's got like 30 houses on it, 2 of which brand new build, thatched roof on each one. So they're not old necessarily. They can be brand new build.
And, you know, if you're doing landlord work or if you're doing generally ICRs, you may one day just find yourself in a home with a thatched roof and you just may not know what extra info you need to consider.
You may also have to be the bearer of bad news as well, depending on what alterations and additions they've made over the years. I can tell you now, the people who messaged me on Instagram, they had to be the bearer of bad news on their EICRs. But they were quite stunned as to the lack of published memorandum, advice, guidance on the specialist installations. I'd love to see the Bovis designs for the thatching, their fire risk assessments, getting away with doing a thatch roof now. I'm sure these houses, John, will probably have some form of suppression in them now, surely, to comply with Part B. And
yeah, you'd think so and hope so, but who knows?
Well, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, 2 of them.
It also says, you know, they'll have to have domestic mains powered alarms, so they're going to have those, which means they're going to have SPDs, you know.
Yeah, so if you've got a new home and it doesn't have fire suppression, just drop us a line on social media. We don't do emails anymore. That's just too expensive and pointless, really. Yeah, okay, no, that's some good information there, chaps. I'm a little bit more aware of that specialist information that we need to understand as installers, contractors, homeowners, and all the rest of it. John, do you have any final thoughts before we?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything on that for the moment. So.
No, that's great. Okay, chaps. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, cheers.
And, until the next one, take care of yourself and each other. Bye-bye.
Bye.